Mother bear with cubs begged baby to let them into the house. What baby did shocked everyone. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The wind howled through the bare trees, sweeping fierce snowstorms down onto Sarah Miller's small wooden cabin. She pulled her woolen scarf tighter around her neck, listening to the wind's relentless roar, as if it intended to consume everything outside. In her arms, 10-month-old Noah slept soundly, his tiny breaths barely stirring, completely unaware of nature's unforgiving wrath. Then, amidst the swirling wind, a different sound emerged. A gentle scratching at the wooden door. Sarah froze. It wasn't the wind, nor the branches scraping against the walls. She slowly stepped toward the window, pulled back the curtain, and stood motionless. Outside, in the hazy curtain of snow, a massive mother bear loomed. Her thick brown fur was coated in white, her deep black eyes shining with an imploring plea. Behind her, two small cubs huddled close to her belly, shivering against the brutal storm. Sarah swallowed hard. Bears didn't behave like they avoided humans, especially in winter when they should have been hibernating in their dens. But the look in Old Silver's, Sarah had already named her in her mind. Eyes held no aggression, only silent desperation. A part of her screamed, "Don't!" That was survival instinct. She had taught students for decades that wildlife could never be trusted. But another part, something deeper, something primal, urged her to open the door. The mother bear wasn't here to attack. She was here to seek something, or someone. She took a deep breath, glanced at Noah still fast asleep, and slowly unlatched the door. A blast of frigid air rushed in, making her shudder. Old Silver hesitated, then lowered her head slightly as if in acknowledgement. Sarah noticed the fresh wound on her front leg, deep, raw, possibly from a steel trap. One of the cubs also looked weaker, its breath labored. Turning back inside, she grabbed some dried meat from the kitchen and set it on the snow-covered ground. The mother bear hesitated for a moment before gently picking it up. But she didn't eat it. Instead, she turned and nudged it toward her cubs, her gaze never leaving Sarah, as if she were trying to communicate something. Sarah had never felt both terror and awe so intensely at the same time. Noah woke up not long after, babbling nonsensically. But then, he turned his head toward the window and let out a sound. Not a cry, not a typical baby babble, but a low, soft call, almost like a bear cub calling its mother. A chill ran down Sarah's spine. She looked outside. Old Silver had curled around her cubs, but her head was lifted, ears perked toward the cabin. When Noah made the sound again, the mother bear lowered her head and let out a deep, rumbling response. Impossible! She had to be imagining this. But at that moment, another sound shattered the eerie connection. An engine, and headlights cutting through the snow. Sarah stiffened. That wasn't a police vehicle, nor anyone familiar. No one drove in this weather unless they had a reason, or a threat. She quickly turned off the cabin lights and held Noah close. Outside, Old Silver sensed the danger too. She stood up abruptly, letting out a warning growl. The cubs cowered behind her. The vehicle pulled up in the yard. 4 figures stepped out, rifles in hand. She recognized them immediately. Poachers, the kind who saw wildlife as nothing more than pelts and trophies. And they had spotted Old Silver. "That's a big one," one of them sneered. "We could get a good price for her." Sarah felt ice settle in her veins. What was she supposed to do? Call the sheriff? No time. She had an old hunting rifle, but what good would that do against 4 armed men? More importantly, how could she protect Noah? And the bears outside? She glanced at Old Silver. The bear didn't run. She stood firm, eyes locked on the intruders. A deep, steady rumble escaped her throat. Not a roar, not an attack, just a declaration. Then, something happened that no one could have anticipated. Noah, still in Sarah's arms, let out another deep, resonant call. Just like before. The poachers hesitated. What the hell? Before they could react, a dark shape exploded from the forest. It wasn't just old Silver. Two more full-grown bears emerged from the other side of the cabin, moving in deliberate unison, surrounding the front yard. A trap had been set, but not by the poachers. The men scrambled back, their grips on their rifles shaking. One cursed under his breath but didn't dare shoot. The bears weren't attacking, but they weren't backing down either. They simply stood, enclosing the trespassers, their gazes cold and calculating. Old Silver's rumbling grew louder, harmonizing with Noah's strange call, forming an eerie rhythm that echoed through the storm. And the poachers, men who had always thought themselves the hunters, realized the terrifying truth. They weren't the predators. They were the prey. One of them muttered a curse and bolted, the others scrambling after him. The truck roared back to life, speeding off into the storm, disappearing into the snowy abyss. Sarah couldn't breathe. She turned to old Silver, and the mother bear looked back at her. There was no fear, no hostility, only understanding. Noah giggled, reaching toward the bear. And for the first time, old Silver lowered her head toward him, a silent nod of acceptance. That night, as the blizzard raged on outside, a connection had been forged, a bridge between humans and bears, between two worlds that had long been kept apart. The blizzard had not yet subsided, but the weight of what had just happened pressed heavily on Sarah Miller's chest. The poachers had fled, their confidence shattered by something they could neither explain nor fight, an unspoken understanding between a child, a woman, and a mother bear. But Sarah knew this was far from over. Noah had finally drifted back to sleep, his tiny fingers still curled around the edge of her sweater. She laid him down gently and stoked the fire, her hands shaking. Not from the cold, but from adrenaline still coursing through her veins. A knock at the door made her jump. Not a scratch like before, not the cautious pawing of a desperate bear. This was deliberate human. Sarah snatched her rifle from the wall before cracking the door open. A blast of icy wind sent a fresh wave of snow swirling into the cabin, revealing the cloaked figure standing just beyond the threshold. Eleanor. The older woman stepped inside without an invitation, shaking the snow off her heavy woolen coat. Her dark eyes swept over the room, taking in Sarah's pale face, the sleeping child, and the lingering tension in the air. They came, didn't they? Eleanor asked, her voice calm, knowing. Sarah nodded, still gripping the rifle, as if it were the only solid thing left in her world. Not just old Silver, more of them. They weren't just protecting themselves, Eleanor. They protected us. They listened. Eleanor let out a breath, as if she had been expecting this. I told you they would come. The bears know, they always have. Sarah swallowed. Know what? Eleanor turned and shut the door against the wind. That something is coming. And they are not the only ones who see it. Sarah set down the rifle, rubbing her face. Eleanor, I don't understand. What's happening? Why did that bear come here? Why did she let Noah talk to her? Eleanor stepped closer, placing a weathered hand on Sarah's shoulder. Because she had no choice. And neither do we. She gestured toward the window, where old Silver still stood just beyond the tree line, her body a dark silhouette against the snow. The two cubs nestled close, their small forms trembling from the cold, from exhaustion, and something else. She is waiting, Eleanor murmured. For you. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. For me, for all of us, but especially for Noah. A sharp gust of wind rattled the windows, as if the storm itself agreed. The next morning the blizzard had begun to ease, leaving the world coated in a thick, silent blanket of snow. Sarah stepped onto the porch, her boots sinking deep with each step. Eleanor followed, her sharp gaze scanning the tree line where old Silver had been the night before. but the mother bear was gone. Instead, a trail of paw prints stretched into the untouched snow, leading toward the forest. Not just bear tracks, larger impressions, deeper grooves in the snow as if something else had moved alongside them. Something heavier. Eleanor knelt, tracing a hand along the prints. Her expression darkened. They weren't alone. Sarah's stomach twisted. "You mean other bears?" "No," Eleanor said, standing abruptly. "Not bears." A branch snapped in the distance. Both women turned sharply, eyes locking onto the shadowed trees beyond the clearing. And then they saw it. A figure stood just beyond the tree line. Tall, draped in heavy furs, its face obscured by the low-hanging limbs. It did not move, did not speak. Sarah's breath came in short, panic bursts. "Who?" Eleanor remained still, her voice barely a whisper, a warning. Sarah didn't wait to find out what that meant. She turned, bolting back toward the cabin, grabbing Noah from his crib just as a new sound filled the air. A howl, not a wolf's. Something deeper, older. Sarah turned just in time to see Eleanor step forward, placing one hand on the wooden porch railing as she stared into the forest. "We have to go, now." Sarah clutched Noah close. "Go where?" Eleanor's eyes didn't leave the tree line. "To the only place where the bears will still be safe." The journey was brutal. The snow was too deep for the truck, so they traveled by foot, following Eleanor through narrow trails, past frozen rivers, always moving toward some unseen destination. Sarah's legs burned with exhaustion, but she pushed forward, Noah strapped securely against her chest, his small breaths warming her skin. "We're close," Eleanor murmured, pausing to listen to the wind. "But something's not right." Sarah turned to see what she meant, and her blood ran cold. The snow behind them was disturbed, not by their footsteps but by something larger, something moving fast. "Run," Eleanor hissed. Sarah obeyed, her lungs screaming as she forced herself forward. The trees blurred past her, the weight of Noah making each step agonizing. Behind them, the sound of heavy footfalls crashed through the forest, a low growl, close, too close, and then a roar. Not human, not animal, something between. Eleanor spun, raising her arms, her voice cutting through the chaos. She shouted words in a language Sarah didn't recognize, but the effect was immediate. Silence. Sarah turned, her breath frozen in her throat. Standing just feet away, on the ridge above them, was Old Silver. And she was not alone. Two other bears flanked her, their massive forms blocking whatever had been pursuing them. Their breath rose in thick clouds, their eyes locked on the darkness beyond. Then, from that darkness, something stepped forward. It was human, and yet not. Draped in fur, its face was hidden by a crude mask made of bone and hide. Its posture was wrong, hunched, shifting unnaturally between 2 legs and 4, as if it couldn't decide which it was supposed to use. Sarah's entire body screamed to run, but her legs refused to move. The figure tilted its head, peering at her. Then it spoke. "Give us the child." The words were guttural, barely human but clear. Sarah clutched Noah tighter, stepping back. "No," Eleanor said, her voice firm. "You will not touch him." The figure let out a low, rasping laugh. "It is not yours to decide." The wind howled through the trees, and Old Silver let out a sound, a deep, primal growl that sent a ripple of dread down Sarah's spine. The figure hesitated, and then, without another word, it turned and disappeared back into the trees. Sarah's knees buckled, but Eleanor caught her. "We're not safe yet. We need to move. Now." Sarah glanced at Old Silver one last time, and for the first time she understood. The mother bear had not come for help. She had come to warn them. The blizzard had not yet subsided, but the weight of what had just happened pressed heavily, on Sarah Miller's chest. The poachers had fled, their confidence shattered by something they could neither explain nor fight, an unspoken understanding between a child, a woman, and a mother bear. But Sarah knew this was far from over. Noah had finally drifted back to sleep, his tiny fingers still curled around the edge of her sweater. She laid him down gently and stoked the fire, her hands shaking, not from the cold, but from adrenaline still coursing through her veins. A knock at the door made her jump. Not a scratch like before, not the cautious pawing of a desperate bear. This was deliberate human. Sarah snatched her rifle from the wall before cracking the door open. A blast of icy wind sent a fresh wave of snow swirling into the cabin, revealing the cloaked figure standing just beyond the threshold. Eleanor. The older woman stepped inside without an invitation, shaking the snow off her heavy woolen coat. Her dark eyes swept over the room, taking in Sarah's pale face, the sleeping child, and the lingering tension in the air. "They came, didn't they?" Eleanor asked, her voice calm, knowing. Sarah nodded, still gripping the rifle as if it were the only solid thing left in her world. Not just old silver, more of them. They weren't just protecting themselves, Eleanor. They protected us. They listened. Eleanor let out a breath, as if she had been expecting this. "I told you they would come. The bears know. They always have." Sarah swallowed. "Know what?" Eleanor turned and shut the door against the wind. "That something is coming, and they are not the only ones who see it." Sarah set down the rifle, rubbing her face. "Eleanor, I don't understand. What's happening? Why did that bear come here? Why did she let Noah talk to her?" Eleanor stepped closer, placing a weathered hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Because she had no choice, and neither do we." She gestured toward the window where old Silver still stood just beyond the tree line, her body a dark silhouette against the snow. The two cubs nestled close, their small forms trembling from the cold, from exhaustion, and something else. "She is waiting," Eleanor murmured. "For you." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. "For me? For all of us?" But especially for Noah. A sharp gust of wind rattled the windows, as if the storm itself agreed. The next morning the blizzard had begun to ease, leaving the world coated in a thick, silent blanket of snow. Sarah stepped onto the porch, her boots sinking deep with each step. Eleanor followed, her sharp gaze scanning the tree line where old Silver had been the night before. But the mother bear was gone. Instead, a trail of paw prints stretched into the untouched snow, leading toward the forest. Not just bear tracks, larger impressions, deeper grooves in the snow as if something else had moved alongside them. Something heavier. Eleanor knelt, tracing a hand along the prints. Her expression darkened. They weren't alone. Sarah's stomach twisted. "You mean other bears?" "No," Eleanor said, standing abruptly. "Not bears." A branch snapped in the distance. Both women turned sharply, eyes locking onto the shadowed trees beyond the clearing. And then they saw it. A figure stood just beyond the tree line, tall, draped in heavy furs, its face obscured by the low-hanging limbs. It did not move, did not speak. Sarah's breath came in short, panicked bursts. "Who is that?" Eleanor remained still, her voice barely a whisper, a warning. Sarah didn't wait to find out what that meant. She turned, bolting back toward the cabin, grabbing Noah from his crib just as a new sound filled the air. A howl. Not a wolf's. Something deeper. Older. Sarah turned just in time to see Eleanor step forward, placing one hand on the wooden porch railing as she stared into the forest. "We have to go. Now." Sarah clutched Noah close. "Go where?" Eleanor's eyes didn't leave the tree line. "To the only place where the bears will still be safe." The journey was brutal. The snow was too deep for the truck, so they traveled by foot, following Eleanor through narrow trails, past frozen rivers, always moving toward some unseen destination. Sarah's legs burned with exhaustion, But she pushed forward, Noah strapped securely against her chest, his small breaths warming her skin. "We're close," Eleanor murmured, pausing to listen to the wind. "But something's not right." Sarah turned to see what she meant, and her blood ran cold. The snow behind them was disturbed, not by their footsteps, but by something larger. "Something moving fast. Run," Eleanor hissed. Sarah obeyed, her lungs screaming as she forced herself forward. The trees blurred past her, the weight of Noah making each step agonizing. Behind them, the sound of heavy footfalls crashed through the forest. A low growl. Close, too close. And then, a roar. Not human, not animal, something between. Eleanor spun, raising her arms, her voice cutting through the chaos. She shouted words in a language Sarah didn't recognize, but the effect was immediate. Silence. Sarah turned, her breath frozen in her throat. Standing just feet away on the ridge above them was Old Silver, and she was not alone. Two other bears flanked her, their massive forms blocking whatever had been pursuing them. Their breath rose in thick clouds, their eyes locked on the darkness beyond. Then, from that darkness, something stepped forward. It was human. And yet not. Draped in fur, its face was hidden by a crude mask made of bone and hide. Its posture was wrong, hunched, shifting unnaturally between two legs and four, as if it couldn't decide which it was supposed to use. Noah, still cradled against Sarah's chest, made a soft sound, a cooing, melodic hum. Old Silver turned her massive head toward the child, her ears perking up, and then she answered. A deep, resonant call that sent shivers through Sarah's spine. The figure in the mask flinched. Noah continued his strange song, his voice unwavering. Old Silver echoed him again, this time louder, her body shifting protectively in front of Sarah and Eleanor. The masked figure hesitated, and then, without another word, it turned and disappeared back into the trees. Sarah's knees buckled, but Eleanor caught her. "We're not safe yet. We need to move. Now." Sarah glanced at Old Silver one last time, and for the first time she understood. The mother bear had not come for help. She had come to protect the child who could speak her language. The blizzard had not yet subsided, but the weight of what had just happened pressed heavily on Sarah Miller's chest. The poachers had fled, their confidence shattered by something they could neither explain nor fight. An unspoken understanding between a child, a woman, and a mother bear. But Sarah knew this was far from over. Noah had finally drifted back to sleep, his tiny fingers still curled around the edge of her sweater. She laid him down gently and stoked the fire, her hands shaking. Not from the cold. A knock at the door made her jump. Not a scratch like before. Not the cautious pawing of a desperate bear. This was deliberate human. Sarah snatched her rifle from the wall before cracking the door open. A blast of icy wind sent a fresh wave of snow swirling into the cabin, revealing the cloaked figure standing just beyond the threshold. Eleanor! The older woman stepped inside without an invitation, shaking the snow off her heavy woolen coat. Her dark eyes swept over the room, taking in Sarah's pale face, the sleeping child, and the lingering tension in the air. "They came, didn't they?" Eleanor asked, her voice calm, knowing. Sarah nodded, still gripping the rifle as if it were the only solid thing left in her world. Not just Old Silver, more of them. They weren't just protecting themselves, Eleanor. They protected us. They listened. Eleanor let out a breath, as if she had been expecting this. "I told you they would come. The bears know. They always have." Sarah swallowed. "Know what?" Eleanor turned and shut the door against the wind. "That something is coming, and they are not the only ones who see it." Sarah set down the rifle, rubbing her face. "Eleanor, I don't understand. What's happening? Why did that bear come here? Why did she let Noah talk to her?" Eleanor stepped closer, placing a weathered hand on Sarah's shoulder. because she had no choice. And neither do we. She gestured toward the window where old Silver still stood just beyond the tree line, her body a dark silhouette against the snow. The two cubs nestled close, their small forms trembling from the cold, from exhaustion, and something else. "She is waiting," Eleanor murmured. "For you." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. "For me? For all of us, but especially for Noah." A sharp gust of wind rattled the windows, as if the storm itself agreed. The next morning the blizzard had begun to ease, leaving the world coated in a thick, silent blanket of snow. Sarah stepped onto the porch, her boots sinking deep with each step. Eleanor followed, her sharp gaze scanning the tree line where old Silver had been the night before. But the mother bear was gone. Instead, a trail of paw prints stretched into the untouched snow, leading toward the forest. Not just bear tracks, larger impressions, deeper grooves in the snow as if something else had moved alongside them. Something heavier. Eleanor knelt, tracing a hand along the prints. Her expression darkened. They weren't alone. Sarah's stomach twisted. "You mean other bears?" "No," Eleanor said, standing abruptly. "Not bears." A branch snapped in the distance. Both women turned sharply, eyes locking onto the shadowed trees beyond the clearing. And then they saw it. A figure stood just beyond the tree line, tall, draped in heavy furs, its face obscured by the low-hanging limbs. It did not move, did not speak. Sarah's breath came in short, panicked bursts. "Who is that?" Eleanor remained still, her voice barely a whisper, a warning. Sarah didn't wait to find out what that meant. She turned, bolting back toward the cabin, grabbing Noah from his crib just as a new sound filled the air. A howl. Not a wolf's, something deeper, older. Sarah turned just in time to see Eleanor step forward, placing one hand on the wooden porch railing as she stared into the forest. "We have to go. Now." Sarah clutched Noah close. "Go where?" Eleanor's eyes didn't leave the tree line. To the only place where the bears will still be safe. The journey was brutal. The snow was too deep for the truck, so they traveled by foot, following Eleanor through narrow trails, past frozen rivers, always moving toward some unseen destination. Sarah's legs burned with exhaustion, but she pushed forward, Noah strapped securely against her chest, his small breaths warming her skin. "We're close," Eleanor murmured, pausing to listen to the wind. "But something's not right." Sarah turned to see what she meant, and her blood ran cold. The snow behind them was disturbed. Not by their footsteps, but by something larger. Something moving fast. "Run!" Eleanor hissed. "Run!" Eleanor hissed. Sarah obeyed, her lungs screaming as she forced herself forward. The trees blurred past her, the weight of Noah making each step agonizing. Behind them, the sound of heavy footfalls crashed through the forest. A low growl. Close, too close. And then a roar. Not human, not animal, something between. Eleanor spun, raising her arms, her voice cutting through the chaos. She shouted words in a language Sarah didn't recognize, but the effect was immediate. Silence. But Sarah turned, her breath frozen in her throat. Standing just feet away on the ridge above them was old Silver. And she was not alone. Two other bears flanked her, their massive forms blocking whatever had been pursuing them. Their breath rose in thick clouds, their eyes locked on the darkness beyond. Then, from that darkness, something stepped forward. It was human, and yet not. Draped in fur, its face was hidden by a crude mask made of bone and hide. Its posture was wrong, hunched, shifting unnaturally between 2 legs and 4 as if it couldn't decide which it was supposed to use. Noah, still cradled against Sarah's chest, made a soft sound. Old Silver turned her massive head toward the child, her ears perking up, and then she answered. A deep, resonant call that sent shivers through Sarah's spine. The figure in the mask flinched. Noah continued his strange song, his voice unwavering. Old Silver echoed him again, this time louder, her body shifting protectively in front of Sarah and Eleanor. The masked figure hesitated, and then, without another word, it turned and disappeared back into the trees. Sarah's knees buckled, but Eleanor caught her. We're not safe yet. We need to move, now. Sarah glanced at Old Silver one last time, and for the first time she understood. The mother bear had not come for help. She had come to protect the child who could speak her language. But if the road reapers knew where they were now, they would not stop. And next time, they wouldn't be alone. The storm had worsened, turning the landscape into an unforgiving white abyss. The howling wind rattled the cabin's wooden walls, and Sarah could feel the temperature dropping rapidly. The injured cub, barely able to stand, shivered violently, despite the thick fur meant to protect it from the cold. Its mother, Old Silver, watched Sarah with an intensity that felt almost human, as if she understood the desperate gamble they were about to take. Eleanor, her face lined with urgency, knelt beside the cub, her fingers tracing the wound along its foreleg. The gash was deep, swollen with infection, and if left untreated, the little one wouldn't survive the night. Sarah swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the decision pressing against her ribs. We don't have a choice, she murmured, tightening her grip on Noah, who was nestled against her chest, his small body warm and safe. We bring them in, at least into the storage shed. If we don't, the cub won't make it. Eleanor nodded, already pulling a small leather pouch from her satchel. Help me guide them inside. The shed is close enough that they won't feel trapped, but we need to be careful. Sarah took a deep breath before stepping out into the storm, her boots sinking into the fresh snow. She approached Old Silver cautiously, her heartbeat thundering in her ears. The massive bear did not move, only watching as Sarah gestured toward the wooden shed beside the cabin. Were you trying to help? Sarah whispered, though she knew the bear could not understand her words. Or, perhaps, after what had happened with Noah, it could. Old Silver huffed, then nudged the injured cub forward. The little one whimpered but obeyed, its tiny legs trembling with effort. The second cub hesitated before following its sibling, and together, the three of them moved toward the shed. Sarah opened the door wide, stepping aside as the bears cautiously entered. The space was small but insulated, lined with stacks of firewood and old tools. It would provide enough shelter to keep them alive through the night. Eleanor wasted no time. She knelt beside the injured cub, pulling out small jars of salve, dried herbs, and a strip of cloth. Sarah, hold the lantern steady, she instructed. This will sting, but it'll draw out the infection. The cub whimpered as Eleanor worked, carefully pressing a mixture of warm herbal paste onto the wound. Old Silver growled low in her throat, shifting uneasily, but she did not interfere. Instead, she watched, her massive head tilting slightly, her deep eyes fixed on Sarah and Eleanor's every movement. Sarah marveled at the moment. This unspoken truce between woman and beast. A connection neither of them could fully understand, yet one they both chose to trust. Noah stirred in her arms, letting out a soft, familiar cooing sound. The sound that had first made Old Silver listen. The mother bear responded immediately, a low, comforting hum that vibrated through the shed's wooden walls. The injured cub relaxed slightly, pressing closer to its mother's warmth, soothed by the exchange. Sarah met Eleanor's gaze. They both knew this was something beyond science, beyond logic, something ancient, something lost to time. But before either could speak, a sharp crack split through the night air. A gunshot. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Eleanor's hands froze over the cub's wound. Old Silver lifted her head sharply, ears pricked, body tense. Then another shot rang out, echoing through the valley. The road reapers, Eleanor whispered, her voice edged with steel. "They've come back!" Sarah's mind raced. The storm should have kept them away, but greed was stronger than reason. If they had realized the bears were here, they wouldn't hesitate. Another gunshot, closer this time. Sarah turned to Old Silver, who was already shifting to block her cubs with her massive body. Her breath came in short, heavy bursts, her muscles coiled ready to defend her young. "No," Sarah whispered. "Not like this." She grabbed Eleanor's arm. "Stay with the cubs. I need to get Noah inside." Eleanor hesitated only a second before nodding. "Be quick." Sarah pulled Noah closer to her chest and ran through the snow, the icy wind slashing against her exposed skin. The cabin was only a few yards away, but every step felt like an eternity. She threw open the door, slammed it shut behind her, and bolted it before pressing her back against the wood, gasping for breath. Outside, the howling wind masked the sounds of approaching footsteps. Then, headlights cut through the blizzard. Sarah's stomach turned to stone. 3 sets of headlights. Trucks. Their engines rumbled, tires crunching against ice-packed ground. The road reapers had arrived. She backed away from the door, her mind racing. They couldn't see the bears. If they did, it would be a massacre. Sarah had 1 rifle. Maybe a few rounds of ammunition. Not enough to stand against armed men. Noah stirred in her arms, sensing her fear. He let out another soft cooing sound. But this time, there was no answering call from Old Silver. The mother bear was waiting to see what Sarah would do next. And for the first time, Sarah realized the bears weren't just relying on her, she was relying on them too. A heavy fist pounded on the door. "Sarah Miller," a voice called. "Logan Reed." Sarah's hands tightened around Noah. "What do I want you? What? Oh, I know. I know you're in there," Logan continued, his voice a dangerous drawl. "And I know you've got those damn bears. You think you can hide them?" Another fist slammed against the door. "Come on now, let's be reasonable." Sarah's eyes flicked to the rifle leaning against the wall. If she had to, she would use it. Another voice, one of Logan's men. "I saw tracks. The shed. They're in there." Sarah's breath caught. No, the sound of footsteps crunching through the snow, moving toward the shed. Then, a sound split the night. A roar so deep, so primal, that Sarah felt it vibrate through her chest. Old Silver. Then, another roar. And another. More than just Old Silver. Sarah lunged for the rifle just as the first scream rang out. The first scream tore through the blizzard, sharp and raw. Sarah barely had time to grab the rifle before another roar followed. Old Silver answering the violence with a fury that shook the earth. Outside, the road reapers scattered. Logan Reed's men weren't prepared for this. They had expected an easy kill, helpless animals cornered in a shed. Instead, they were met with a mother's wrath. Sarah moved quickly, setting Noah down in a safe corner of the cabin, his wide eyes reflecting the fear and power crackling through the night. Eleanor rushed in behind her, breathless, her hands slick with the herbal salve she had been using on the injured cub. "They fired first," she panted. Old Silver warned them. They didn't listen. Sarah's grip tightened around the rifle. Through the frosted window, she could make out the chaos outside. Shadows moved in the snow. Men staggering back toward their trucks, shouts mixing with the howling wind. But more than that, she saw the shape of Old Silver, standing tall on her hind legs, her massive frame silhouetted against the swirling snow. And she wasn't alone. A second bear, then a third emerged from the tree line. Wild bears, drawn by something deeper than hunger, more ancient than fear. Sarah's pulse pounded. Had Noah summoned them? Or had Old Silver called for reinforcements? Then she saw Logan. He stood near the shed, his rifle raised. Not backing down, not running like the others. "Enough of this!" Logan bellowed, his voice thick with rage. "You think you can scare me with a few damn animals?" Sarah threw open the cabin door before she could second-guess herself. The wind blasted her, biting through her clothes, but she stepped forward, keeping her rifle at her side, her every movement calculated. "Put the gun down, Logan," she called over the storm. "You don't want this fight?" Logan let out a bark of laughter, hollow and cruel. "Oh, I think I do. You and your pet bears have interfered long enough." A deep growl rumbled from Old Silver's chest. She lowered herself to all fours, taking a step toward him. A warning. "Logan," Sarah tried again. "Walk away." But his grip tightened. He was going to fire. Then, just as his finger twitched on the trigger, Noah made a sound. A soft, deliberate cooing noise, his bear call. Everything stopped. The wind, the shouting, even Logan himself seemed frozen in place, because Old Silver, this massive, wild predator, turned, ever so slightly, toward the sound of the child's voice. And instead of attacking, instead of growling, she made the same sound back. Sarah's breath hitched. Eleanor, standing just behind her, whispered, "It's happening again." The bears were listening, all of them, even the ones that had just arrived. Noah cooed again, his small voice carrying through the snow. And the bears responded, their deep, rumbling vocalizations harmonizing in a way that made Sarah's skin prickle. The road reapers watched in stunned silence, their weapons forgotten, their fear now something different, something approaching awe, because what they were seeing wasn't a fight. It wasn't an attack. It was communication. Noah, a 10-month-old baby, was speaking to wild bears, and they were answering him. Logan's face twisted in confusion, his certainty cracking. He wasn't just facing animals anymore. He was facing something he couldn't control, something that didn't fit into the world as he understood it. "No," he muttered. "No, this is some trick." Sarah stepped closer. "It's not a trick, Logan. It never was." For the first time, she saw real doubt flicker in his eyes. The same doubt creeping into the faces of his men. Because nothing about this was normal. And maybe, just maybe, they were beginning to realize they had been wrong. Then the blare of sirens cut through the night. Sheriff Wilson's patrol car skidded to a stop at the edge of the clearing. More vehicles followed. Wildlife officers, additional deputies. Their arrival shattered the last of Logan's bravado. One of his men, pale and shaking, dropped his gun into the snow. Another followed. One by one, the road reapers surrendered. But Logan wasn't finished. He turned back to Sarah, his face twisted with rage. "You think this changes anything?" She met his glare with unwavering steel. "I think it changes everything," Logan sneered. "They're just animals." Noah, still cradled in Eleanor's arms, let out one final call. Old Silver answered immediately. But this time she did something different. She dipped her massive head, just slightly, towards Sarah, a gesture that wasn't submission but acknowledgement, recognition. Logan saw it. And for the first time, Sarah saw fear in his eyes. The sheriff's voice cut through the tension. "Logan Reed, you're under arrest for illegal poaching, destruction of protected wildlife habitat, and armed assault." The cuffs clicked around his wrists before he could protest. As the officers rounded up the rest of the road reapers, Sarah exhaled shakily. The fight was over. But something else had begun. She turned back to Old Silver, who was still watching her. Those intelligent eyes filled with something deeper than instinct. Sarah nodded. A silent thank you. Old Silver huffed, then turned toward the shed where her cubs waited. The other bears, sensing the danger had passed, began retreating into the storm, disappearing as quietly as they had come. Eleanor stepped beside Sarah. "You saw it, didn't you?" Sarah swallowed, her throat tight. "Yeah, they aren't just animals." Eleanor's voice was steady. "They never were." Sarah looked at Noah, who was watching the retreating bears with the quiet understanding of someone who had never doubted them to begin with. She smiled, brushing a hand over his small head. "I think we're finally starting to remember." As the last of the headlights faded into the distance, Sarah knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. The flashing red and blue lights painted streaks across the snow-covered trees as more vehicles pulled into the clearing. Sheriff Wilson stepped out first, his boots crunching through the ice. Behind him, a second car door swung open, revealing Dr. Olivia Chen, a renowned wildlife researcher from the University of Montana. Her sharp eyes scanned the scene, taking in the battered road reapers, the cabin, and the massive form of Old Silver standing guard by the shed. Sarah tightened her grip on Noah, who nestled against her shoulder. The baby was quiet now, his small fingers curled into her coat, his earlier vocalizations still ringing in Sarah's ears. He had called the bears, and they had listened. Dr. Chen approached carefully, her breath visible in the frigid air. "Miss Miller," Sarah nodded. "I assume you're here about the bears." The researcher's gaze flickered toward Old Silver. "And the child." The sheriff cleared his throat. "Logan Reed and his men are in custody," he announced. "But we've got bigger problems. These bears shouldn't be acting like this." He gestured toward Old Silver. "And I sure as hell haven't seen a baby talk to them before." Dr. Chen turned to Sarah, her expression unreadable. "We need to understand what's happening here. The footage from the deputy's body cams, what we just saw, it's impossible." Sarah hesitated. She had spent her life as a wildlife educator, grounded in science, in observable behavior. But nothing about this situation fit within the boundaries of normal research. And yet, she had seen it, felt it, lived it. "Noah isn't just making noises," she admitted. "He's communicating." Dr. Chen's brows furrowed. "With bears?" Eleanor stepped forward, her presence commanding as always. "The old stories speak of this," she said. "A time when humans and animals understood each other. It's not impossible. It's just something we've forgotten." The sheriff exhaled, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Well, whether it's legend or science, we need answers." He turned to Dr. Chen. "Your team will document everything. But I want to make one thing clear. These bears don't get put down. If we confirm they aren't a danger, we figure out a way to protect them." Dr. Chen nodded, her scientific curiosity outweighing any skepticism. "Agreed. We need to examine their behavior in a controlled setting." She turned back to Sarah. "Would you allow us to observe Noah with the bears? I promise full security measures. No harm will come to him or the animals." Sarah's instinct screamed to protect Noah, to keep him away from the prying eyes of researchers. But another part of her knew the truth. This wasn't something she could hide. This was bigger than her, bigger than their small cabin in the wilderness. "I'll be there the entire time," she said firmly. "If Noah or the bears show any distress, we stop immediately." Dr. Chen gave a small nod. "Understood." The next morning, Sarah stood inside a makeshift observation area set up just outside the cabin. The research team had arrived at dawn, bringing recording equipment, monitoring devices, and a reinforced enclosure to ensure safety. Noah sat in her lap, bundled in warm layers, his bright eyes watching everything with curiosity. Dr. Chen's voice crackled over a nearby radio. "We're ready." Old Silver lingered just beyond the perimeter, her cubs close to her side. She had not fled when the authorities arrived. She had stayed, as if she understood that something larger was unfolding. Noah shifted in Sarah's lap, then let out a small, deliberate cooing sound. The effect was immediate. Old Silver lifted her head. Her ears twitched forward. Then, slowly, she responded with a deep, resonant sound. One of the researchers sucked in a sharp breath. That was a direct response. Noah babbled again, more insistently this time, and the mother bear took a step forward. The cubs hesitated, but Old Silver let out a reassuring chuff, and they followed. "She's answering him," Dr. Chen whispered, barely containing her excitement. "But look at her movements. She's cautious, careful. She's treating him like one of her own?" The radio crackled again. "We're detecting distinct vocal patterns," another researcher confirmed. "Some match known bear cub distress calls, but others are unique. This isn't mimicry. It's structured communication." Eleanor, standing just behind Sarah, smiled knowingly. "He's speaking their language." Dr. Chen stared at the data streaming across her tablet, then back at Noah, who was now babbling happily. "If this is true, if a human child can naturally develop a way to communicate with wild bears, this changes everything." The sheriff, standing nearby, muttered, "Hell of a lot more than everything." Sarah glanced down at Noah, then back at Old Silver. The bear was watching them, her dark eyes filled with an intelligence that defied simple explanations. Sarah knew, in that moment, that nothing about their lives would ever be the same. The tension in the small sheriff's office was palpable as the footage played on a large monitor. The grainy but unmistakable images captured by Thomas Carter's documentary camera showed Logan Reed and his men planting explosives along the North Ridge denning sites. A few seconds later, a thunderous detonation rocked the screen, sending chunks of rock and snow cascading down the slopes, destroying the natural caves where the bears once hibernated. The room was silent except for the soft hum of the monitor. Sheriff Wilson leaned forward, his jaw tightening. "This is enough to bury him," Thomas, sitting across the table, nodded. "The footage is time-stamped, geotagged, and backed up on multiple servers. Even if Logan had the best lawyers in the state, he can't talk his way out of this." Dr. Chen, standing near the back of the room, glanced at Sarah, who held Noah protectively in her lap. "This explains why the bears sought you out. They weren't just wandering. They were refugees." Sarah's throat tightened, and they had nowhere else to go. Deputy Hayes let out a low whistle. "Logan's looking at federal charges, environmental crimes, destruction of protected wildlife habitats, illegal mining operations. This isn't just a slap on the wrist. He's going away for a long time." Eleanor, who had been silent until now, folded her arms. "That man didn't just destroy land. He disrupted something much older, something sacred." Her gaze flickered to Noah, who was watching the monitor with uncharacteristic stillness, and he had no idea what forces he was provoking. A knock at the door interrupted them. Another deputy stepped in. "Sheriff, we just received word," Logan's posted bail. The room snapped to attention. Sheriff Wilson slammed a hand against the desk. "You've got to be kidding me." The deputy shook his head. Judge approved it. His men pooled together the money. "He walked out 20 minutes ago." Sarah's stomach dropped. "Hell come back." Sheriff Wilson exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. "I'll have patrols watch your cabin, but I need you to be on high alert." Dr. Chen stepped forward. "We can also move the bears to a safer location. The sanctuary at Silver Lake is willing to take them temporarily while we conduct our research." Sarah hesitated, glancing at Old Silver through the window. The bear was resting near the temporary enclosure the research team had built, her cubs curled up beside her. She didn't belong behind walls, even if they were built for her safety. But Logan was still out there, and he wasn't the type to let things go. "I'll talk to her," Sarah said at last. "But if she doesn't want to go, we won't force her." Eleanor gave a knowing nod. "She'll decide what's best." That evening, Sarah stood at the edge of the enclosure, Noah in her arms. Old Silver watched her with quiet intelligence, her dark eyes reflecting the glow of the cabin lights. "Noah," Sarah whispered, "tell her." The baby let out a soft series of cooing sounds, a mixture of human babble and something distinctly bear-like. Old Silver chuffed in response, then glanced toward the distant tree line. She knew. She understood the danger. Sarah took a deep breath. "We have a place for you to stay, just for a little while. It's safe." Old Silver let out a long, thoughtful exhale. She looked at her cubs, then back at Sarah. "She's thinking about it," Eleanor murmured behind her. "But she won't leave if she senses the fight isn't over." And as the wind howled through the valley, Sarah knew neither would they. The following morning, the crisp Montana air carried an unusual quiet over Cedar Creek. The research team was busy preparing the transport vehicles, ensuring the journey to Silver Lake Sanctuary would be as smooth as possible. Dr. Olivia Chen stood near the loading area, overseeing the preparations with a mix of professional detachment and unmistakable excitement. Sarah, however, felt the weight of something more profound. She stood near the enclosure, Noah in her arms, watching Old Silver and her cubs as they moved restlessly within their temporary confines. The mother bear had been uncharacteristically still that morning, her sharp eyes darting between Sarah and the unfamiliar metal cages lined up nearby. "She doesn't want to leave," Sarah murmured. Eleanor, standing beside her, nodded. "She knows this isn't just about relocation. She knows things are changing." Dr. Chen approached carefully. "We'll do everything to ensure their safety. But I need to ask, do you think Noah will interact with them at the sanctuary the same way he does here?" Sarah let out a slow breath. I don't know. His connection to them isn't about a place. It's something deeper." Noah, as if sensing the moment, let out a soft coo, his own variation of the sounds Old Silver often made to her cubs. The massive bear lifted her head, ears twitching. Then, after a long pause, she let out a low, rumbling response. The cubs immediately mimicked her, their smaller sounds blending with their mother's. Dr. Chen's eyes widened. "That's incredible. He's not just mimicking their sounds. He's engaging in structured communication. This isn't instinct. It's learned." Sarah swallowed the lump in her throat. "That's why she's hesitating. She's not just leaving behind a place, she's leaving behind a bond." The loading process began an hour later. The sanctuary staff had planned a non-invasive approach, using food lures and calming pheromones rather than tranquilizers. Old Silver was wary but did not resist. She entered the transport cage of her own accord, her cubs following her lead. Noah, watching from the porch, let out another set of sounds, softer, almost questioning. Old Silver turned to look at him, then chuffed a final time. It was not a goodbye. It was a promise. At Silver Lake Sanctuary, the transition was carefully monitored. The enclosed habitat provided acres of dense forest, natural caves, and flowing water, a space meant to simulate the wild while ensuring their safety. But for all the preparations, nothing could have prepared the researchers for what followed. On the third day, Noah was brought to the observation platform. He had been restless at the cabin, his sleep disrupted as if sensing the absence of the bears. When he saw Old Silver again, he let out an excited series of vocalizations, gripping the railing with his small hands. The mother bear, who had spent much of her time exploring the enclosure cautiously, immediately turned. She made a deep, rolling sound and strode toward the viewing area. Her cubs trailed behind her, their own calls forming a response pattern. The scientists observing the interaction exchanged astonished glances. Dr. Chen hurriedly gestured to the sound technicians. "Record everything, every frequency, every modulation." Noah pressed his face against the glass. He was no longer just a child watching an animal through a barrier. He was calling to her, and she was answering. For the next several days, the research team meticulously documented the exchanges. Noah's vocalizations displayed a remarkable consistency. Certain sounds elicited specific responses, showing the foundations of a structured communication system. The bears, in turn, began adapting their vocal range, as if meeting the child halfway in comprehension. "This is beyond what any of us anticipated," Dr. Chen admitted during a research briefing. "We're not just witnessing interspecies communication. We're witnessing a mutual learning process. The bears are modifying their responses based on Noah's input, one of the linguists on the team, who had initially been skeptical of the project, finally spoke up. It's almost as if they recognize him as a conversational partner, not just responding to stimuli but engaging in reciprocal exchange. The implications were staggering. For decades, science had underestimated the cognitive depth of bears, dismissing them as solitary and instinct-driven. But here, in a quiet sanctuary in Montana, a baby and a mother bear were rewriting those assumptions, and the world was beginning to notice. The days passed at Silver Lake Sanctuary, each one bringing new revelations. Noah's interactions with old Silver and her cubs continued to evolve, proving beyond any doubt that communication between species was not just possible, it was happening in real time. The research team, once cautious in their assessments, now spoke in terms of paradigm shifts. Dr. Olivia Chen and her colleagues meticulously documented each exchange, breaking down the vocal patterns, gestures, and even the subtle shifts in body language that seemed to accompany the interspecies dialogue. Linguists debated whether this was the first recorded instance of an emergent language between humans and bears. Ethologists reconsidered long-held beliefs about animal cognition. And Sarah, who had spent her life teaching about wildlife, found herself questioning whether humanity had truly understood animals at all. One evening, as she sat on the observation deck watching Noah press his tiny hands against the glass, mimicking the way old Silver's cub reached out toward him, the realization settled into her bones. "What if we've always been able to do this?" she whispered. Eleanor, who sat beside her, nodded slowly. "We have. We just forgot how to listen." Sarah exhaled, rubbing her hands together against the coal. "When I was teaching, I always told my students that animals communicate in their own ways. We thought it was just signals, instincts, survival responses. But this isn't just that, is it?" Eleanor's eyes glowed softly in the dim light. "No, this is something older. Something we lost when we stopped seeing ourselves as part of the world and started believing we were separate from it." The word sank deep, stirring something Sarah had never fully acknowledged before. Was it possible that long ago, before language divided humans from the rest of the wild, there had been a common tongue, a way of existing that didn't rely on dominance or distance, but instead on mutual understanding? Noah was proving that connection could be reawakened, and if he could do it, perhaps others could too. A week later, the world took notice. Thomas Carter's documentary had been picked up by a major network, and overnight, Noah's story ignited a global conversation. Scientists, conservationists, and philosophers weighed in, each offering their interpretations. Some dismissed it as an anomaly, a unique case of human-animal bonding. Others argued that it was proof of an intelligence in nature that humanity had long underestimated. But what struck Sarah the most wasn't the academic debates. It was the letters. Messages arrived from all over the world. Emails, handwritten notes, even recordings. People shared stories of inexplicable moments with animals. A hiker who swore a wolf had guided her to safety after she was lost. A farmer who had always known which of his cows was unwell just by looking in their eyes. A child who had always felt a deep, unspoken understanding with the wild birds outside her window. It was as if Noah's story had awakened something, a memory buried deep in the human spirit. A whisper that said, "You were part of this once, you can be again." Sarah sat in the sanctuary's quiet research office, reading through message after message, tears pricking her eyes. This wasn't just about Noah. It wasn't just about the bears. It was about something far greater. "We've been trying to protect wildlife," she murmured, without realizing that we're supposed to be part of it. Dr. Chen, standing nearby, looked up from her data logs. "What do you mean?" Sarah turned to her, gesturing to the letters spread across the desk. "For centuries, we've treated nature like something separate, something to observe, to manage, to conserve from a distance. But what if conservation isn't just about protecting animals from us? What if it's about restoring the connection between us?" Dr. Chen studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You're saying that what's happening here isn't just about bears. It's about redefining the relationship between humans and the natural world." Sarah glanced out the window, where Noah was once again calling to Old Silver, his tiny voice carrying through the crisp air. The mother bear responded in kind, her rumbling voice filled with something that sounded almost like patience, almost like recognition. "Yes," Sarah said softly. "That's exactly what I'm saying." Months later, as winter gave way to spring, Sarah and Eleanor stood at the edge of the sanctuary's land, watching as Old Silver and her cubs ventured toward the open forest. The research team had agreed. While the bears could stay at the sanctuary as long as they wished, they should not be confined if they chose to leave. The cubs hesitated at the tree line, glancing back toward Noah, who stood holding Sarah's hand. He let out one last string of bear-like sounds, a farewell wrapped in the simple language they had built together. Old Silver turned, eyes locking onto Noah's, and then she chuffed softly, nudging her cubs forward into the wild. Sarah's chest ached with something indescribable as she watched them disappear into the trees. It wasn't loss. It wasn't sadness. It was hope. She squeezed Noah's hand gently. "Do you think we'll see her again?" Noah looked up at her with those bright, knowing eyes. He made a small sound, one she didn't understand. But somehow, she felt its meaning in her heart. Yes, and deep in the vast Montana wilderness, Old Silver lifted her head to the wind, listening. The connection was not broken. It never had been. It had only been waiting to be remembered. The research at Cedar Creek continued with growing intensity. Scientists from across the country arrived, eager to study Noah's remarkable ability. With specialized audio equipment, they analyzed the subtle nuances of his vocalizations, mapping the frequencies and rhythms against documented bear communication. Dr. Olivia Chen led the study, her team meticulously reviewing each interaction. "It's more than just imitation," she noted during a research briefing. "Noah isn't simply mimicking bear sounds, he's structuring them. There's syntax here, a deliberate order. This isn't a random series of noises. It's language." The data confirmed what Sarah and Eleanor had long suspected. When Noah vocalized, Old Silver and her cubs responded with matching patterns, their replies carrying the distinct markers of question, affirmation, and even what seemed like reassurance. More astonishingly, the cubs had begun to integrate Noah's sounds into their own communication, forming a hybrid dialect, neither fully human nor fully bear. One evening, as Sarah watched Noah through the glass of the observation deck, she saw something that took her breath away. Old Silver's now nearly grown cub approached the fence, pressing its nose close, emitting a series of gentle chuffing sounds. Noah, sitting cross-legged just inside, responded in kind. The exchange continued for nearly a full minute, an unmistakable back-and-forth dialogue. "What are they?" Sarah whispered. Dr. Chen, observing from the control room, hesitated. "We think the cub is asking about the forest, about leaving." Sarah's chest tightened. "And Noah?" Dr. Chen turned to her, eyes filled with wonder. "He's telling it not to be afraid." As spring transitioned into early summer, the time came for the cubs to make their own way into the wilderness. The sanctuary had ensured they had everything they needed: strength, knowledge, safety. But now nature called them home. Old Silver had already begun to wander farther from the enclosure, returning only occasionally to check on her young. It was a sign Sarah had dreaded, but also knew was inevitable. The bears did not belong behind fences. They never had. On the morning of their departure, Noah stood by the enclosure gate, small hands gripping the wooden post. The research team gathered behind him, cameras rolling, audio equipment set up to capture what they expected to be the final exchange between boy and bear. Old Silver's cubs hesitated near the open gate, sniffing the air. The younger one looked back, whimpering slightly. Then, from beside the gate, Noah made a soft, familiar sound, the same one old Silver had used to comfort her cubs. The effect was immediate. The younger cub's ears perked forward, its hesitation melting. It made a low, rumbling response, then turned and followed its sibling into the dense forest. Old Silver, watching from a distance, let out a final, deep vocalization, a farewell wrapped in ancient understanding. Then she, too, vanished into the trees. Noah, though only 2 years old, did not cry. He simply pressed his small hand to his chest, as if holding something precious inside. Sarah knelt beside him. "What did she say, sweetheart?" Noah turned his bright, knowing eyes toward her. He placed his hand on hers and whispered, "We will find each other again." Sarah blinked back tears. Somehow, she believed him. Months passed, and the absence of the bears left an undeniable void at Cedar Creek. Yet their presence remained, woven into the very fabric of the research center's work. The vocalization studies continued, with new insights emerging regularly. Dr. Chen and her team compiled their findings into a groundbreaking paper, arguing that interspecies communication might not just be possible, but far more common than previously believed. The documentary, now titled The Language Between Worlds, gained global attention, sparking debates in scientific communities, conservation groups, and even philosophical circles. If Noah could bridge the gap between humans and bears, what else had humanity overlooked? What other connections had been lost to time and modernity? Then, on a crisp autumn morning, everything changed again. Sarah was drinking coffee on the porch, Noah playing nearby with his wooden animal figurines, when the call came in from the sanctuary. "We have movement near the old denning sites," Dr. Chen's voice crackled over the radio. "A bear. Possibly old Silver." Sarah's heart pounded. "Are you sure? There's more. She's not alone. She has new cubs." The mug in Sarah's hands nearly slipped. "She came back," Dr. Chen hesitated. "And that's not all. She's vocalizing," calling toward the center. Sarah's gaze snapped to Noah, who had already stopped playing, eyes fixed on the tree line. He tilted his head slightly, then parted his lips. A single soft sound escaped him, a familiar call carrying across the clearing. From the distant woods, the answering call came almost instantly. Sarah's breath caught. The conversation had never ended. It was only just beginning. The revelation about Noah's past connection with bears unsettled Sarah in a way she couldn't quite articulate. The idea that a mother bear had unwittingly played a role in Noah's survival before he was even born seemed too extraordinary to be coincidence. And yet, the pieces fit together too well to ignore. Robert sat on the porch, his expression thoughtful as he recounted that fateful night at Yellowstone. "Lisa and I were camping near the Lamar Valley. It was peaceful, until that bear and her cub wandered into our sight. She didn't charge, didn't even seem frightened of us, just stood there, watching." He exhaled slowly. "Lisa was convinced the bear was trying to tell us something. We packed up that night mostly because she insisted. By morning, her water had broken." Sarah absorbed this quietly, glancing at Noah, who was playing in the yard with his wooden bear figurines, completely oblivious to the weight of the conversation. "And now, years later, another mother bear appears when he needs her most," she murmured. "It's not just any bear, though." Robert's voice was low, almost reverent. "It's old Silver. That means she might be the same bear." Sarah finished for him. The realization sent a chill through her. Could it really be possible? Could the same creature that had once saved Noah's life have found him again, recognizing him across time? Before she could voice her thoughts, a sound drifted from the trees. A deep, familiar chuffing. Old Silver. Noah immediately perked up, his small hands stilling as his gaze locked onto the forest. Then, as naturally as breathing, he made the soft rhythmic call he had used so many times before. A moment later, the bear's answering call resonated through the clearing. That evening, Dr. Olivia Chen and her research team arrived in haste. The moment Sarah had relayed Robert's story, Olivia insisted on seeing the data again. If this connection truly predates Noah's birth, we're looking at something far beyond learned communication, she said, setting up her laptop to review the recordings. Thomas Carter, the documentary filmmaker, had also returned, camera in hand, sensing that whatever was about to unfold would be groundbreaking. Sarah, Robert, Eleanor, and the research team gathered in the main observation room at Cedar Creek, reviewing the footage of Noah's interactions with Old Silver over the past year. Olivia pointed to a particular segment from their first recorded exchange. This sound pattern here. Noah used it consistently when he first met Old Silver, and she responded to it almost immediately, Olivia explained, enlarging the spectrogram on her screen. But when we compare it to this clip from last week, the structure has evolved. It's no longer just call and response. There are inflections, shifts in tone. These indicate shared understanding, even emotional exchange. What are you saying? Robert asked. That this isn't just communication, it's recognition. Olivia finished. Old Silver didn't just learn to communicate with Noah. She knew him from the start. The weight of the statement settled over the group like a heavy fog. If this was true, if Old Silver had, in some instinctive, inexplicable way, remembered Noah from that night in Yellowstone, it meant their connection wasn't just a scientific anomaly, it was something more. Something ancient. The following morning, the research team prepared for a controlled observation. Old Silver had been seen near the perimeter of the sanctuary, but had not yet approached the enclosure. The plan was to bring Noah to the viewing deck and see if she would respond. Noah, as usual, was completely unfazed. As Sarah carried him outside, he wriggled in her arms, eager to get closer. The air was crisp, with the scent of damp earth and pine. The sanctuary staff and researchers stood at a respectful distance, their recording devices ready. Sarah placed Noah on the wooden deck, where he stood on his own, small and fearless, staring toward the trees. "Come," he called, his voice clear, unwavering. Silence stretched for a long moment. Then, from the shadows of the forest, Old Silver emerged. A collective gasp rippled through the observers. The bear moved with deliberate grace. Her eyes locked onto Noah, unblinking, unwavering. She made no move to threaten, no sign of hesitation. Instead, she chuffed softly, lowering her head in a gesture that, to everyone watching, looked unmistakably like reverence. Noah responded with a series of short, rhythmic coos. The bear rumbled in return, her massive shoulders relaxing, her body language mirroring a mother greeting her cub. It was then that the younger researchers, who had been skeptical at first, began whispering among themselves, their scientific detachment giving way to awe. Dr. Chen, still recording, spoke aloud. She's recognizing him, not just as a human, as someone specific. Eleanor stepped forward, her expression unreadable. She's not just remembering him, she said softly. She's honoring him. Over the next several days, Old Silver continued to linger near the sanctuary, never straying far. It was clear she had no intention of leaving just yet. One evening, as Sarah sat on the porch with Eleanor, watching the sun dip behind the mountains, she found herself voicing the question that had been gnawing at her for days. What does this mean, Eleanor? What are we supposed to do with this knowledge? The older woman sipped her tea, considering. The old stories speak of bonds between humans and animals, of guardians who walk between worlds. Perhaps Noah is one of them, Sarah exhaled, shaking her head. It's hard for me to accept that. I spent my life teaching people that animals and humans are separate, that we must respect the divide. But now you've seen with your own eyes that the divide was never real, Eleanor said gently. It was only forgotten. A rustling near the tree line caught their attention. They turned to see Noah, now toddling through the grass, making his way toward the edge of the property. And there, waiting just beyond the fence, was Old Silver. The bear made a low, welcoming sound, and Noah, as if drawn by something beyond language, reached out his small hand. Sarah rose to her feet, heart pounding, not with fear, but with something else. Something deeper, understanding. She didn't move to stop him, because for the first time she truly saw what Eleanor had been trying to tell her all along. This wasn't a discovery, it was a remembrance, and Noah had never forgotten. Dr. Olivia Chen stood frozen, watching old Silver's reaction on the monitoring screen. As the footage of the destroyed North Ridge played, the mother bear didn't just retreat. She let out a sequence of sorrowful sounds, her deep vocalizations resonating through the laboratory. Olivia's gaze shifted to Noah. The child didn't cry, but instead produced rhythmic sounds. Sounds they had previously recorded when he communicated with old Silver. "Did you all hear that?" One of the researchers broke the tense silence. "He's not just imitating, he's adjusting his tone to match the bear's emotions. This isn't just communication, it's understanding." Sarah held Noah tightly, feeling his small heartbeat thumping steadily. She realized that Noah was trying to soothe old Silver's distress. He had responded immediately to the mother bear's anxiety, as if there was a deeper bond between them that science had yet to comprehend. "Let's try another test," Olivia said, her eyes gleaming with barely contained excitement. "Show them the images of the new sanctuary we're proposing for the bears." One of the technicians quickly adjusted the display, presenting images of the untouched wilderness designated for the sanctuary. Almost instantly, old Silver's reaction changed. The low, worried sounds faded, replaced by deep, measured breaths and a soft whimper. She stepped closer to the screen, focusing on the lush scenery, while Noah tilted his head and made another sound, one that resembled confirmation. Olivia turned to Sarah, her voice nearly trembling. "Noah isn't just communicating with her. He's relaying information. We just witnessed a real-time dialogue between a human and a wild animal." A young researcher spoke up. "This changes everything we know about interspecies communication. If a child can do this, could humans have once had this ability?" The air in the lab grew thick with unanswered questions. Noah blinked at old Silver, then at the screen. He made another sound, and this time, the mother bear didn't just respond. She turned her head toward the camera. A deliberate action, as if she recognized she was being observed. That night, Sarah sat at her desk in the cabin, staring at the notes she had been compiling for months about Noah and old Silver. Every event had been extraordinary, but what happened today made her realize something more profound. Noah wasn't just learning from old Silver. The mother bear was also learning from him. Eleanor, Sarah's steadfast friend, sat across from her, stirring a cup of herbal tea. "What are you thinking, Sarah?" Sarah sighed. "Noah is doing something I never thought possible. It's not just mimicry. He understands the mother bear, and she understands him. If we don't continue this research, we might lose the chance to understand something vital about the natural world." Eleanor smiled. Maybe this is what our ancestors always knew. Humans once had a deeper connection with nature than we do now. We weren't just observers. We were part of the ecosystem. Noah is simply helping us remember. Sarah felt that truth. But how could they convince the world of such a profound revelation? How could they persuade those who only believed in science that something existed beyond formulas and data? She glanced at Noah, peacefully asleep in his crib, his lips slightly parted as if continuing an unfinished conversation in his dreams. Outside the window, the moonlight bathed the sanctuary. Old Silver raised her head, gazing toward the cabin, as if she too was waiting for a signal, for an answer. And Sarah knew that this was only the beginning of something far greater than she had ever imagined. Dr. Olivia Chen sat at the observation deck of Cedar Creek Research Center, reviewing the latest recordings. The structured patterns of Noah's vocalizations were undeniable. The child was not just mimicking bear sounds, he was creating structured responses, engaging in actual communication. It was more than a breakthrough. It was a revolution in scientific understanding of interspecies intelligent. We've isolated over 60 unique vocal patterns so far, one of the linguistics researchers reported, adjusting his headset as he listened to the latest recordings. Some of them are clear emotional indicators: comfort, distress, alertness, but others seem to function as requests or even descriptions. Dr. Chen nodded. And Old Silver's responses? The researcher hesitated. That's the part that's hard to believe. The patterns in her responses show variation depending on the situation. It's as if she's actively learning from Noah, adapting to his way of communication. The realization sent a chill down Dr. Chen's spine. If true, this was not a one-sided phenomenon. This was linguistic evolution happening in real time, across species boundaries. Sarah, standing near the glass-enclosed observation area with Noah in her arms, exchanged a glance with Ellen. "So what does this mean?" she asked. Dr. Chen exhaled, placing down her notes. "It means we are witnessing something no one thought was possible. A living, evolving dialogue between humans and another species. We need to document this, build a proper lexicon, a dictionary," Eleanor murmured. "Like the old stories." Sarah turned to her, intrigued. "What do you mean?" "The elders in my tribe spoke of a time when humans and animals shared a common language," Eleanor said, "before we forgot how to listen." She gestured toward Noah, who was babbling softly in his distinctive cooing sounds, his small hand reaching toward Old Silver on the other side of the reinforced barrier. "Maybe Noah is proving that the language was never truly lost." Dr. Chen, always skeptical of folklore, found herself unable to dismiss Eleanor's words outright. The data was undeniable. Science was catching up to what had long been considered myth. The following weeks were a flurry of activity. Dr. Chen's team worked tirelessly to document and categorize Noah's communication with the bears. A complex pattern emerged, one that suggested distinct words and even rudimentary syntax. The bears were not just responding instinctively. They were participating in a structured exchange. Dr. Wilson, the head of the sanctuary, reviewed the data with growing disbelief. "I spent years studying bear behavior, but I never thought I'd see something like this. If we can prove that Noah is teaching Old Silver new vocal patterns, this changes everything." The implications were staggering. If bears were capable of learning structured communication, then how many other species had the same untapped potential? Was language itself not a human invention, but a universal bridge between intelligent beings? The media frenzy surrounding Cedar Creek intensified as news spread of the findings. Wildlife experts, linguists, and cognitive scientists flocked to Montana, eager to witness the phenomenon for themselves. Some were skeptical, dismissing the research as overinterpretation. Others, however, saw the potential for a groundbreaking shift in human understanding of the natural world. Meanwhile, Noah continued his daily interactions with Old Silver and her cubs, seemingly unaware of the scientific and philosophical storm his existence had unleashed. His bond with the bears deepened, and his ability to communicate grew more sophisticated. One afternoon, during a controlled session, an unexpected test arose. A loud mechanical noise, an approaching helicopter carrying additional research equipment, sent the cubs into a frenzy of distress. Old Silver let out a low, warning growl, her body tense, protective. The research team, standing behind reinforced observation glass, held their breath, fearing she might lash out. But then Noah made a sound. A soft, rhythmic coo, different from his usual calls. It was soothing, reassuring. Old Silver froze. Her ears flicked forward, listening. Slowly, her growls softened. The cubs, following their mother's lead, relaxed, no longer cowering in fear. Dr. Chen turned to her team. "Did we get that recorded?" One of the technicians confirmed with a nod, replaying the audio through the monitors. "Hey." He calmed her down. Through vocal communication alone, Sarah's heart pounded. It was proof, undeniable proof. that the communication was functional, meaningful, and reciprocal. Noah wasn't just speaking to the bears. He was understanding them. Later that evening, Sarah sat on the porch of her cabin, Noah resting in her arms. Eleanor sat beside her, gazing at the stars above the vast Montana wilderness. "Do you think he was born for this?" Sarah asked quietly, her voice laced with awe and fear. "To be some kind of bridge between our world and theirs?" Eleanor took a long breath before answering. "I think Noah remembers something the rest of us forgot. And the bears remember too. Maybe that's why they came to you. They weren't just seeking help. They were seeking connection." A rustling in the distance caught their attention. From the tree line, barely visible in the moonlight, stood Old Silver. She was watching them, her eyes reflecting the glow of the cabin's light. Noah, half asleep, stirred in Sarah's arms. He made a soft, breathy sound. Old Silver responded with a deep, rolling vocalization. Gentle, familiar. A lullaby between two worlds. And in that moment, Sarah knew. This was only the beginning. The debate over the fate of the bears intensified. The research conducted by Dr. Chen's team had proven beyond doubt that Old Silver and her cubs had developed a unique communication system with Noah. They were no longer ordinary wild bears. Their relationship with humans had evolved into something unprecedented. This presented a dilemma. Returning them to the wild carried significant risks, yet keeping them in captivity indefinitely seemed equally unjust. Wildlife officials, biologists, and conservationists gathered in the Cedar Creek Research Center to discuss their options. Some argued that the bears should be relocated to a remote, secure location where they could gradually reintegrate into a wild environment. Others feared that their prolonged exposure to humans had made them dependent, and releasing them could lead to dangerous encounters with people in the future. "This is not just about these 3 bears," Dr. Chen stated firmly. "If we release them without monitoring, we risk undoing everything we've learned. But keeping them in a traditional sanctuary setting may not be enough either." One official, clearly skeptical, leaned forward. "Are you suggesting we establish a completely new kind of conservation area? One where bears and humans actively interact?" Sarah, who had been listening intently, finally spoke up. "That's exactly what we need. A sanctuary designed specifically for them. Not just a place where they can be observed, but one where their intelligence, their ability to communicate, can be nurtured and studied." A murmur rippled through the room. The idea was radical. Most sanctuaries aim to minimize human contact with wildlife, not encourage it. But the evidence was undeniable. Noah's communication with the bears had changed everything. "We don't fully understand what's happening yet," Dr. Chen continued. "But we do know this. These bears are not behaving like any wild bears we've ever studied. They are displaying cognitive abilities that challenge our understanding of their species. To ignore that would be a mistake." The state wildlife director sighed. "And who exactly would fund such a place?" Thomas Carter, the documentary filmmaker who had been quietly filming the discussion, stepped forward. "I can secure funding," he announced. "The world is watching this story unfold, and there are organizations out there that would invest in a groundbreaking project like this. Public interest in Noah and the bears is massive." A moment of silence followed as the weight of the situation settled over them. Then Joe Running Bear, the tribal elder who had been present throughout much of the research, spoke up. "Our ancestors spoke of a time when humans and animals understood each other. We believe this is a return to that balance. If this sanctuary is built, our people would be honored to help protect and oversee it." The discussion continued late into the night, with debates over logistics, ethics, and long-term sustainability. But by the end, a consensus was reached. Cedar Creek would expand into a specialized research and conservation sanctuary dedicated to understanding interspecies communication and coexistence. The decision marked a turning point, not just for Old Silver and her cubs, but for the future of human-wildlife relationships as a whole. As Sarah looked across the table at Noah, who was quietly playing with a toy bear, she knew this was only the beginning. They had taken the first step toward something extraordinary, something that could change the way the world understood the creatures they had so long considered separate from themselves. The night was eerily quiet around Cedar Creek, the kind of silence that signaled an impending storm, not of nature, but of human intent. Sarah had just finished putting Noah to bed when the first signs of trouble appeared. The lights flickered briefly before plunging the cabin into darkness. At the same moment, her satellite phone lost signal. She didn't need confirmation to know what was happening. Logan Reed and his men had returned. Outside, the faint hum of vehicles shutting off in the distance reached her ears. Footsteps crunched against the gravel path leading toward the cabin. They weren't trying to be stealthy. They wanted her to know they were there. Sarah moved quickly, locking the doors and grabbing the rifle she kept for emergencies. Eleanor, who had been staying at the cabin, emerged from the back room, her face set in grim determination. "They've cut the power and communications," Sarah whispered. "We're on our own for now." Eleanor nodded, her eyes sharp. "Not entirely." She moved toward the window, glancing out into the forest beyond the clearing. "The bears will know." A heavy knock rattled the front door, followed by Logan's voice, slow and taunting. "Sarah Miller, we've come to settle things. Come out, and maybe we don't burn this place down with you in it." Sarah's grip on the rifle tightened. She glanced at Eleanor, who shook her head, urging patience. More voices joined Logan's, at least 6, possibly more. A window shattered in the kitchen. Sarah pulled Eleanor back as a rock tumbled onto the floor, a crude warning of what was coming next. But before Logan and his men could escalate further, a sound cut through the night. A deep, resonant growl that sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. Old Silver. The bears had arrived. The sound of snapping branches and heavy footfalls echoed through the darkness. Logan's men hesitated, shifting uneasily. They had underestimated the intelligence and instincts of these creatures. "What the hell?" one of them muttered just as another growl, this time closer, made him stumble back. Then from the edge of the clearing, Old Silver emerged, her massive form illuminated by the headlights of the gang's trucks. Behind her, 2 other adult bears flanked her position, and further still, her cubs watched from the tree line. Logan cursed, raising his rifle. "They're just animals. We take them down first, then deal with the rest." Before he could fire, Noah's cry rang out from inside the cabin, a high-pitched, deliberate cooing sound, his unique call to the bears. It wasn't a cry of fear, but something else entirely. Old Silver responded instantly, her posture shifting from defensive to something else, understanding. She stepped forward deliberately, making a deep, rolling vocalization. The other bears followed suit, their sounds forming a strange and eerie chorus that filled the clearing. It was not a roar of attack, but something more profound, something that made even the most hardened men hesitate. Sarah could see the confusion on Logan's face. He had expected mindless beasts, not creatures that seemed to be communicating, coordinating. One of the gang members took a step back. "This ain't normal, man. This is..." Logan turned on him. "Shut up and..." But before he could finish, the first bear charged. It wasn't Old Silver, but one of the younger, stronger males from the North Ridge. He barreled forward with terrifying speed, forcing Logan and his men to scatter. Gunshots rang out, but they were wild, panicked. The bears didn't need to attack outright. Their presence alone was enough to send the gang scrambling. Sarah took the opportunity to fling the door open and fire a warning shot into the air. "Get off my land, Logan!" she shouted, "or the bears won't just be scaring you next time." Logan, now bleeding from a gash on his arm, where he had fallen, glared at her with pure hatred. But he wasn't stupid enough to stand his ground. "This ain't over," he snarled before retreating toward his truck. His men followed, shoving each other in their hurry to escape. The trucks roared to life, tires spinning against the dirt as they sped away, disappearing into the darkness. Silence fell again, broken only by the heavy breathing of the bears. Old Silver turned toward the cabin, her eyes meeting Sarah's. There was no doubt in Sarah's mind. Old Silver had understood what was at stake. She had protected them. Noah, still in his crib, made one last soft call. Old Silver chuffed in response before leading her cubs back into the forest. Sarah turned to Eleanor. They knew. They came to help. Eleanor nodded. The connection is real. And it's stronger than we ever imagined. As the adrenaline faded, Sarah realized something else. This was no longer just about research or proving a scientific phenomenon. This was about survival, not just for the bears, but for all of them. And Logan would be back, but next time they would be ready. The howling wind carried the scent of blood and gunpowder, a stark contrast to the pristine white landscape that surrounded Cedar Creek. Logan Reed and his road reapers had underestimated what they were up against. As they moved in, expecting nothing more than frightened humans, they found themselves facing something far beyond their comprehension. Old Silva, her thick silver-streaked fur bristling against the cold, stood at the forefront, her dark eyes, sharp and intelligent, locked onto the intruders. But she wasn't alone. Two massive grizzlies from Northridge had joined her, their breath visible in the freezing air. They weren't here to attack. They were here to defend. Inside the cabin, Sarah gripped her rifle with shaking hands, her heart hammering against her ribs. Eleanor stood beside her, her weathered face calm, but her fingers twitching slightly at her side. Robert, having only just arrived from Alaska, pulled Noah close, whispering to him in a soft voice, trying to keep the child calm. But Noah wasn't scared. The baby, as if sensing the moment's gravity, reached out towards the door, making his strange, melodic cooing sounds. The bears responded instantly, their deep, guttural rumbles harmonizing with Noah's voice in a way that sent chills down Sarah's spine. This was no mere coincidence. This was communication, coordination. Outside, Logan Reed sneered, adjusting his grip on his shotgun. "What the hell is this? Some kind of circus act?" He spat, his breath curling into the frigid air. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," a voice called out. Deputy Hayes had arrived, his patrol truck barely visible through the snow, headlights slicing through the storm. He stepped out cautiously, hand resting on his holster. "We have the place surrounded." "Lower your weapons," Logan barked out a laugh. "Surrounded? You think a couple of cops and some hippie scientists are gonna stop us?" He barely finished his sentence when Old Silver took a single step forward, her massive frame moving like a shadow through the snow. The two other bears followed suit, flanking her, their low growls vibrating through the ground. They didn't charge, they didn't roar, but their presence alone was enough to make even hardened criminals hesitate. One of Logan's men, clearly unnerved, stepped back. "Boss, I don't like this. Bears aren't supposed to act like this. They're just animals." Logan snapped. "Get a grip." But then something even more inexplicable happened. Old Silver stood on her hind legs and let out a sequence of sounds, deep rumbles, short grunts, and a final exhalation that almost sounded like a command. The other two bears followed, their heads tilting in eerie unison as they turned their focus from the gang to the child inside the cabin. Noah. He responded with his own sound, a series of rhythmic coos and hums, eyes bright with something Sarah could only describe as recognition. The air was thick with tension, as if something ancient was unfolding before them. The road reapers weren't just facing wild animals anymore. They were facing something beyond their understanding. A primal, ancient force. Logan, his arrogance faltering, gritted his teeth and swung his gun. Enough of this crap. Before he could finish, a blur of motion erupted from the shadows. A massive paw lashed out, striking the barrel of Logan's shotgun with bone-cracking force. He let out a strangled cry as the gun was sent flying, landing several feet away in the snow. Logan stumbled back, clutching his wrist, eyes wide in terror. "They're communicating," Eleanor murmured, barely able to believe her own words. "They're strategizing." Another of Logan's men let out a curse and turned to run, but the second bear intercepted him with a warning growl, cutting off his retreat. The rest of the gang, clearly outmatched, exchanged panicked glances. "Stand down," Deputy Hayes ordered, stepping forward, gun drawn. "Drop your weapons now, or I swear I'll have every law enforcement agency in Montana here before dawn." The gang hesitated for a moment longer, before one by one they let their weapons drop. Logan, his face a twisted mask of fury and disbelief, sank to his knees in the snow, holding his injured wrist. "This isn't over," he hissed. "You think you can just—" Old Silver let out a deep final growl that cut him off entirely. This time, it wasn't just a warning, it was a promise. The tension broke as the officers moved in, cuffing the remaining road reapers. Logan was hauled to his feet, his face pale, his bravado shattered. Sarah, still gripping her rifle, exhaled slowly, the realization of what had just transpired settling in. The bears had protected them, not just as wild animals defending their territory, but as something more. Something intelligent, something aware. Noah, still watching from the safety of Robert's arms, reached out one tiny hand toward Old Silver. The great bear tilted her head, let out one final soft sound, almost like a sigh, and turned away, disappearing back into the storm. Her duty was done. Sarah felt tears sting at the corners of her eyes. The battle was won, but the implications of what had happened here would ripple far beyond Cedar Creek. This was just the beginning. As the first rays of dawn broke through the dense Montana forest, the flashing red and blue lights of the sheriff's vehicles illuminated the clearing around Cedar Creek. The arrival of law enforcement was met with a mixture of relief and tension, as Logan Reed and his gang of road reapers stood frozen, their weapons still in hand. The air crackled with uncertainty. Sheriff Wilson stepped out of his SUV, his hand resting on his holstered sidearm. Behind him, deputies fanned out, their rifles trained on the bikers. "Drop your weapons, now," Wilson commanded, his voice carrying over the tension-choked clearing. For a long, agonizing moment, no one moved. Logan's grip tightened around his rifle, his jaw clenched. He scanned the scene, the cops, the glares of Sarah, Eleanor, and Robert, and most notably, the towering figures of Old Silver and the two other bears standing guard. Their deep, guttural growls reverberated through the still morning air. The message was clear. Any aggression would be met with a force beyond human control. Noah, still nestled in Sarah's arms, let out a series of soft, rhythmic coos. The mother bear responded immediately, her growls shifting into something more measured, more intentional. The exchange was uncanny, like a conversation held across species barriers. Dr. Chen, standing a few feet away, frantically took notes, her eyes wide with wonder. "They're responding to him," she whispered, not just to his voice, but to his intent. One of the road reapers, a younger man with a snake tattoo winding up his forearm, took an uneasy step back. "Logan, man, this ain't right. This kid, this is something else." Logan's face twisted in rage. "Shut up. They're just animals, and that kid's some freak." Sheriff Wilson took another step forward. "Enough, Logan. You're done. You're done. You and your boys are under arrest for multiple felonies: trespassing, armed assault, destruction of protected wildlife habitats. Don't make this worse than it already is." Logan let out a sharp breath, his rage barely contained. But then, as if sensing the shift in power, Old Silver took one step forward, her massive frame nearly level with Logan's. She let out a single, low growl, not one of aggression, but something deeper. Something that even a man like Logan could understand. A warning. His fingers twitched on the trigger, but then, Finally, he let the gun slip from his grip. It hit the snow with a dull thud. One by one, the other bikers followed suit, dropping their weapons and raising their hands. "Smart move," Wilson muttered as his deputies rushed forward, securing each man in handcuffs. Thomas, his camera rolling, captured every moment. The world would see this. The reality of what had happened here. The undeniable evidence of animal intelligence and cooperation. He turned to Dr. Chen. "Do you realize what this means? These bears coordinated an effort to protect a human family. They assessed threats, responded to cues. This isn't just instinct. This is strategy." Dr. Chen nodded, still recording data. "And the way they responded to Noah, this could change everything we thought we knew about animal cognition." As the last of the road reapers were loaded into police vehicles, Old Silver let out a deep, contented breath. Her cubs, sensing the tension fading, nuzzled against her, and she let out a soft, rumbling sound. A sound Dr. Chen now recognized as one of comfort. Sarah held Noah close, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "You did it, little one," she murmured. "You saved us all." The mother bear met Sarah's gaze, holding it for a moment before turning and leading her cubs back toward the forest's edge. But she did not leave entirely. Instead, she paused, watching, waiting, as if she knew this story was far from over. And in Sarah's heart, she knew the same. This was just the beginning of something extraordinary. Cedar Creek had transformed from a secluded research site into a globally recognized center for wildlife communication and conservation. The events of the past months had not only changed the lives of those at the cabin, but had also begun to reshape the way scientists and conservationists viewed the intelligence of wild animals. Dr. Olivia Chen stood before a gathering of researchers, conservationists, and tribal leaders at the newly expanded Cedar Creek Research and Conservation Center. A large screen displayed video footage of Noah interacting with Old Silver, their vocal exchanges meticulously analyzed and documented by the research team. "What we have here," Dr. Chen began, her voice filled with a mix of excitement and awe, "is the first verifiable evidence of interspecies communication that goes beyond mimicry. This is not conditioning. This is not simple learned response. This is a language in development." The audience, consisting of some of the world's foremost animal behaviorists and linguists, watched in silence as Dr. Chen played a series of spectrograms comparing Noah's vocalizations with those of the bears. The patterns revealed a structured and intentional form of communication. Gasps of astonishment rippled through the room as they realized the implications. Sarah Miller, seated in the front row with Noah on her lap, exchanged a glance with Eleanor. "It's more than science," she murmured. "It's a bridge. Something we forgot but are finally rediscovering." The facility itself had undergone a dramatic transformation. What had started as a simple observation station had expanded into a full-scale wildlife research center, complete with an advanced bear sanctuary designed to provide a semi-natural habitat while allowing continued study of their behaviors. The Tribal Council had worked alongside researchers to ensure that indigenous perspectives on bear communication were included in the research framework. One of the most remarkable findings emerged from tracking data and behavior observations. Bears from across the Blackwater Forest were now moving differently, forming larger, more complex social structures. It seemed that the presence of Old Silver and the other North Ridge bears, combined with their exposure to Noah's unique communication, had influenced their interactions. The sanctuary's tracking collars recorded distinct patterns of bear movement, including gatherings that suggested an increasing level of organized behavior never before documented in wild bears. Meanwhile, Noah continued to grow, his gift developing in ways that defied scientific precedent. Though he was now forming human words at a natural pace for his age, he never lost his ability to communicate with the bears. Every morning, as the researchers set up their equipment, Noah would press his tiny hands against the observation window, and exchange calls with Old Silver and her cubs. The bears would respond instantly, sometimes waiting for him before they made their way into the open study areas. For the scientific community, it was a phenomenon that demanded deeper investigation. Linguists proposed that Noah's brain had developed a hybrid linguistic capability, a structure that allowed him to process animal vocalizations as meaning-laden communication rather than mere sounds. Neuroscientists from multiple institutions proposed joint studies, eager to understand whether Noah's ability was a unique anomaly or a latent skill that humans had once possessed but lost over time. However, as groundbreaking as the research was, it did not come without controversy. Some critics argued that keeping the bears in the sanctuary would only further blur the lines between human-animal relationships, leading to potential ethical dilemmas. Others worried that what was happening at Cedar Creek might encourage reckless human interactions with wild animals elsewhere. The media attention had also brought an influx of visitors, some well-intentioned, others looking for sensationalism. The team had to implement strict security measures to protect both the research and the animals. Yet, for every skeptic, there were many more who saw hope. Conservation organizations saw the potential for using Noah's connection to promote coexistence, rather than conflict between humans and wildlife. Indigenous leaders saw the validation of ancient teachings, proving that the natural world had a language of its own, one that humans had simply stopped listening to. One afternoon, as Sarah and Robert watched Noah play near the observation area, Robert turned to his mother. "You know, I used to worry about him being different. Now I wonder if he's not different at all, just remembering something the rest of us forgot." Sarah smiled, watching as Old Silver approached the fence line, her intelligent eyes fixed on the small boy. Noah's face lit up as he called out to her in his signature cooing sounds. The bear rumbled a response, then turned toward the forest, as if signaling something unseen. A moment later, two more bears emerged from the tree line, ones they had never seen at the sanctuary before. The implications were clear. The message was spreading. Cedar Creek was no longer just a research center. It was the epicenter of a new understanding, one that was changing not only how humans saw bears, but how they saw themselves. And at the heart of it all was a child who simply spoke a language the world had forgotten. As the Cedar Creek Research Center flourished, so too did the vision of a world where humans and bears coexisted not as adversaries, but as partners in understanding. With the sanctuary now linked to the tribal lands through a carefully protected ecological corridor, a profound shift was beginning to take root. The land once contested between industry and conservation was now a bridge between species. Noah, now a toddler with an ever-growing vocabulary, continued to astound researchers with his communication skills. His interactions with Old Silver and her cubs had become more refined, his vocalizations exhibiting a structure that defied previous assumptions about interspecies communication. Under the careful eye of Dr. Chen and her team, they documented every exchange, building an extensive library of sounds, gestures, and responses. One crisp autumn morning, as the sun cast golden light through the towering pines, Sarah watched Noah from the observation deck. He stood at the enclosure's edge, mimicking the low rumbles of Old Silver. The great bear listened, then responded with her own sequence of deep, rolling tones. Noah nodded, then made a different sound, higher in pitch, almost questioning. Old Silver tilted her head, then turned to one of her cubs, who eagerly approached Noah, mirroring his soft cooing noises. "He's teaching them as much as they're teaching him," Dr. Chen murmured beside Sarah, her notebook already filled with transcriptions. Eleanor, standing nearby, smiled knowingly. They were always meant to understand each other. The idea of a new paradigm in wildlife conservation was beginning to spread. The media had taken an interest, and documentaries were already in production. But more importantly, other researchers were following suit, applying similar methodologies to study wolves, dolphins, and elephants, testing whether human-animal communication had more potential than previously believed. Not all reactions were positive, however. Some within the scientific community remained skeptical, dismissing the findings as coincidence or overinterpretation. Others worried about the ethical implications. If bears could communicate on this level, what did that mean for conservation policies, hunting laws, and human-animal interactions? The questions were complex, and the world was still grappling with their answers. Meanwhile, within the tribal council, discussions turned toward deeper cultural implications. Joe Running Bear, now a trusted liaison between the sanctuary and the indigenous community, was instrumental in ensuring that the new sanctuary corridor honored the traditions of his ancestors. The elders saw Noah as a bridge between old wisdom and modern science, proof that the ancient stories of humans and animals speaking the same language were not merely myths. "We must learn from the boy," one elder had told a gathering of scientists and conservationists. But more importantly, we must learn from the bears. That winter, a critical test of the sanctuary's purpose came unexpectedly. A young female bear, not from Old Silver's family, wandered into the protected corridor, injured and malnourished. Rangers observed her hesitantly making her way toward the sanctuary, drawn by the scent of other bears and perhaps by something deeper, an instinct that told her this was a place of safety. When she reached the outer edge of the sanctuary, she hesitated. Old Silver, sensing her presence, approached the boundary. They exchanged a series of low, throaty calls, and then, to the astonishment of the observers, Old Silver stepped aside, allowing the new bear to enter. Noah, who had been watching from the deck, immediately began his soft, melodic sounds, and the young bear, despite her wounds, responded with a hesitant rumble. "She's accepted," Dr. Chen whispered, barely able to contain her excitement. Over the next few weeks, the researchers monitored the new bear closely. She integrated into the sanctuary's ecosystem, showing remarkable adaptability. More importantly, her interactions with Noah suggested that the knowledge Old Silver and her cubs had gained was not isolated. It could be shared with other bears. This opened the door to a possibility none of them had dared to consider before. What if, Dr. Chen speculated during a conference call with leading wildlife experts, this isn't just an anomaly? What if communication is something bears can learn from each other, just as humans pass down language? The implications were staggering. If bears could be taught to recognize human signals, understand basic intentions, and avoid dangerous conflicts, it could revolutionize wildlife management, reducing human-animal conflicts in ways that no previous conservation efforts had succeeded in doing. For Sarah, the transformation was deeply personal. She had dedicated her life to educating others about wildlife, yet nothing she had taught compared to what her grandson was demonstrating simply by existing in harmony with these animals. Sitting by the fireplace one evening, she turned to Eleanor, who was quietly sipping tea. "Do you think Noah will remember all of this when he grows up?" Sarah asked, a note of wistfulness in her voice. Eleanor smiled knowingly. "He won't forget. This is who he is. He's not just part of this story, he's shaping it." Spring arrived, bringing with it more visitors, researchers, journalists, and students, eager to witness the unprecedented relationship unfolding at Cedar Creek. The sanctuary had grown beyond its original purpose. It was no longer just a refuge for displaced bears, but a living testament to the possibility of coexistence. Educational programs were developed, teaching future generations about the importance of respecting and understanding wildlife. One afternoon, as Noah played near the enclosure, Old Silver approached the boundary. She sat down, her large frame poised with an air of dignity. Noah stopped what he was doing and turned to her, making a soft, humming sound. The bear exhaled in response, then did something that no one had ever seen before. She reached her paw forward and gently tapped the ground, 3 times in a deliberate motion. Noah laughed and clapped his hands in the same rhythm. He then pointed toward the distant forest and made a sound none of them had recorded before. Old Silver rumbled softly, then stood and began walking toward the tree line. "She's leaving," Sarah murmured, a lump forming in her throat. Eleanor nodded. "She knows it's time. Old Silver and her cubs, now grown, paused at the sanctuary's edge, glancing back one last time. Noah raised his small hand in a wave, and in response, Old Silver let out a long, low call. A farewell, or perhaps a promise. Then, with unhurried grace, they disappeared into the wilderness, carrying with them the legacy of what had been learned. Noah watched them go, then turned to Sarah and Eleanor with a wide, contented smile. "Bear's home," he said simply, and for the first time in a long time, Sarah felt something deep in her heart shift. Not an ending, but a beginning. A world rediscovering its lost language, one small voice at a time, learning from the past to build the future. Lessons from Cedar Creek. The story of Noah and Old Silver is not just a miraculous journey between humans and wildlife. It reflects a profound truth about our relationship with nature. For centuries, humanity has seen itself as separate from the natural world, attempting to control and exploit it rather than seeking to understand and coexist. But through the events at Cedar Creek, we can see that perhaps it is time to shift our mindset and rediscover a lost connection. One of the greatest lessons from this story is the importance of listening to nature. Noah, a child barely able to walk, carried no preconceived notions or fears that adults often have. He didn't see Old Silver as a dangerous wild animal, but as a being with emotions, thoughts, and its own language. In modern life, we often forget this, that animals are not just instinct-driven creatures but possess intelligence, empathy, and unique ways of communicating. Today, science is beginning to acknowledge that many species are far more cognitively complex than we once believed. Dolphins, elephants, crows, and countless other animals can solve problems, express emotions, and even hold mourning rituals for their deceased. Yet we continue to destroy their habitats, causing mass extinctions without fully understanding the long-term consequences. If humans learn to observe, listen, and interact with nature the way Noah did, perhaps we could find more sustainable solutions to the environmental crises we face. Cedar Creek also teaches us an important lesson about human cooperation. In the story, scientists, law enforcement, the indigenous community, and even former skeptics eventually came together to protect Old Silver and the other bears. This reminds us that when faced with a major issue, whether it's climate change, wildlife conservation, or something else, no one can act alone. Collaboration, open-mindedness, and blending scientific knowledge with traditional wisdom can help us find the right path forward. Ultimately, this story carries a message of hope. If a young child can build a bridge of communication with wildlife, then perhaps each of us can also find a way to reconnect with nature in our own way. Whether it's protecting a forest, caring for animals, or simply respecting the life around us, these small acts matter. Only when humanity truly respects nature can we coexist in harmony and ensure that future generations still have a planet to call home. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If this story moved you, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more inspiring stories of resilience, hope, and the unbreakable spirit of life. See you in the next story.